So 30 years ago today, 30, as a matter of fact, not just 30 years ago today, probably to the hour. So I defended my doctoral dissertation at Cornell, and the defense was on January 21st, 1994. So it's exactly 30 years ago. I remember my wife yesterday asked me, "Do you remember what day it fell on? Like what day of the week?" And I said to her, "Oh, I think it was on a Tuesday." And then she checked, and it turned out to be on a Tuesday. So, and it was in the afternoon. I think it was probably a bit earlier. I think it was maybe from 2 to 4, if I'm not mistaken. So probably by now I had finished or just about finished. And I remember as the committee asked me to step outside the room so that they can deliberate, and then they opened the door and asked me to come back in and so on. My doctoral supervisor was the first one who approached me and said, put out his hand and said, "Congratulations, doctor." So that was the first time that I switched from Mr. to doctor in obtaining the PhD. The title of the PhD was "The Adaptive Use of Stopping Policies in Sequential Consumer Choice." I mean, saying really consumer is too restrictive, because really the doctoral dissertation could be applied in consumer choice, but of course it could be applied to any choice. I later used it for mate choice. You can use it for political choice. And let me set the ground to what that dissertation was all about. The dissertation is in the area of psychology of decision making, or behavioral decision theory. It's really a combination of cognitive psychology and experimental psychology. And specifically, what I was trying to do in the dissertation is study what are called stopping decisions. And now let me explain what I mean by stopping decisions, and then I will, for those of you who didn't notice in the alert to today's XSpaces, I took screenshot from four. So please have those handy if you're able to. So right next to the alert for today's XSpaces, I've got four screenshots of slides that I have used in my lectures. Maybe somebody could put their thumbs up just to make sure that you see where it is. I mean, it's right there in the. Can I get a thumbs up from somebody? Can I have somebody who's there? Anybody? I guess there's a bit of a delay. Anyways, there are four screenshots, as I said, that are really helpful if you want to follow the details of what the doctoral dissertation is about. And I mean, I'm taking the time today to mark the moment. Of course, number one, because it is an important moment. It's a momentous moment. It's the 30-year anniversary of my defense. By the way, I'm 59, so when I defended my dissertation, I was 29, and now it's been 30 years since I've defended it. So now I've gone to the meaning that I've longer lived having defended my PhD than I before I had defended my PhD. I am a sentimental and romantic person, so I keep thinking about all these numbers issues. So, okay, a few people have put their thumbs up, so you have those four screenshots, which will be really important. One of the things, by the way, that I'm really looking forward to, I hope that as Elon Musk develops the video capabilities of XSpaces, I'll be able to have not just audio lectures, but audio visual lectures on X. Imagine I could just turn it on, and 1,000 people could be sitting and actually listening to a lecture that I've put together. So, but for now, since we don't have that ability, I thought giving you that visual aid would help. Okay, so what is the general problem first, and then I'll get into a bit of the weeds. And I'm saying this not because it was my PhD, but really because objectively, it truly fully explains how people make decisions across any decision process, one of the things that, if any of you have followed my work in general, know about me is that I'm a synthetic thinker. In other words, I like to study problems and use frameworks that could be applied in many, many contexts. So evolutionary psychology is something that I've dedicated my academic career to because I can use evolutionary psychology to study politics or economics or mate choice or consumer behavior, or psychiatric conditions in medicine, and these are all fields that I have published in. So one of the reasons why that particular dissertation topic is the one that I ended up working on is because I very quickly realized that it is applicable to any decision that we make, from the most consequential to the most inconsequential ones. Okay, so let's discuss the fundamental problem. So whenever I'm facing a decision, one of the things I need to do is I need to decide how much information to acquire on the competing alternatives before I ultimately decide, okay, I've seen enough, I'm ready to vote for candidate X, or I'm ready to buy car B, or I'm ready to marry girl Y. In other words, contrary to what classical economists tell us, see, classical economists think that in order for you to maximize your utility, you need to look at all available and relevant information. Otherwise, if you only look at a subsample of the information, then you can't be assured that the choice that you've made is the optimal one from a utility maximization perspective. Well, of course, classical economists operate in la la land. And so, yes, if you had all the time in the world and if you were a very committed calculational machine, then you would sit there and spend 400 years looking at all of the information before you bought that house or purchased that car. But we don't do that. Rather, what we do is we look at a certain amount of information, and at what point we say, I've seen enough, I'm ready to buy that house. I've seen enough, I'm ready to buy that Mazda. So what is the mechanism that you use cognitively in your brain so that you could say, I'm now stopping and committing to a choice? Stopping what? I'm stopping the information search process. Okay. Now, the reason why the model that I worked on in my doctoral dissertation is called a sequential binary model, it's because what you're basically doing is you are left down to two final choices. So this model kicks in once you've narrowed the field of possible choices down to two. So think, for example, about the presidential elections in the United States. There is a primary election, process where many candidates might present themselves within their own party. Then they whittle it down to one person. The other party does the same, and then in the final process, right, in the general election, it's just two people. But it could also be for anything else, right? So actually, consumer psychologists have studied a process whereby you start with all possible alternatives. Let's say you're choosing between all beers. Well, there are the beers that you are aware of and the beers that you are unaware of. Well, the ones that you are unaware of, you'll never look at, yes? Now, the ones that you are aware of, you can break those down into the inert set, the evoked set. Yeah, right. So like there's a bunch of them that you know they exist, but you're never going to try them because for whatever reasons, right? So let's say you're choosing between business schools. Well, I'm only going to look at schools that are in the top 10. Those are my preferred ones. And then I might have some backups in the top 30, but I'll never look at any business schools that are below top 30 because it's not worth for me to go to that business school then because it's not prestigious enough. And so there is a mechanism by which humans, in general, consumers in particular, will whittle down their choices down to the final two, and that's when my model kicks in. So that's why it's called a sequential binary choice model. It is sequential because what you're doing, so now if you look at the first figure or screenshot that I sent you, it's called the criterion dependent choice model. Do you see it? Can I get a thumbs up from somebody just so that I can make sure that you're following me, because it's going to make the conversation a lot easier if I can assume that everybody is looking at those curves. Can I get a thumbs up from anybody? The criterion dependent choice model. you see these horizontal curves. Okay, so what is that saying? You see, there are two. Thank you guys who put up your thumbs. I appreciate that. Okay, so you've got alternative A and you've got alternative B. On the x-axis, you've got how many attributes am I going to acquire or look at before I stop and make a choice, either choose alternative A or choose alternative B. Now, what do I mean by attributes? Let's suppose I was choosing between cars to purchase. So alternative A is Mazda, alternative B is Toyota. Okay, well, attributes are the things that define what a car is. So price of the car is an attribute. The gas efficiency of the car is another attribute. The safety record of the car is another attribute. How green the car is another attribute, and so on. So there may be 50 attributes that one can look at across those two final alternatives. But of course, none of us are going to sample all 50 attributes. We're going to sample enough attributes until something clicks in our brain that says, stop acquiring more information. You've now seen enough. Buy the Mazda. That's exactly what we do. Okay. And so what this model does, this cognitive psychological model, what it does is it exactly explains step by step the cognitive processes that your brain goes through in making that stopping decision. So if you see on that curve, there are two horizontal lines that I called K. K just means this is the level of differentiation that I must reach in order that I either choose A or B. So if A ever becomes so ahead that it crosses that K curve, I stop and choose A. Or if in symmetric way, if I get to B first, I stop and choose B. So those are called stopping thresholds, because basically what it's saying is I need to achieve that level of differentiation between Mazda and Toyota before I'm sufficiently convinced that I'm ready to choose whichever car wins first. You follow? So what you're going to do is you're going to acquire one piece of attribute at a time across the two alternatives. So let's say my most important attribute is price. So I will look at price of the Mazda and of the Toyota. Depending on which one scores higher, there's going to be a tracking curve that either goes up towards the A stopping threshold or the B stopping threshold. And then it becomes a race. Whichever stopping threshold I hit first, I will stop and choose. So let me go to the next slide. So now we're going to the next slide called criterion dependent choice model, where I actually give an example, right? So if you see at the bottom of that curve, at the bottom of that figure, there is an actual example. There is D1, D2, D3, D4, and so on. D simply means dimension, or dimension is just another word for attribute. So in this case, I'm going to sample the attributes in decreasing order of importance, meaning all other things equal, I will look at my most important attribute first, then my second most important attribute next, then my third most important. So the numbers next to the D1s and D2s, so for example, see D1 has a weight of 0.3. That means that's my most important attribute. D2 is my second most important, therefore, and it has a weight of 0.25 and so on. So I start, and now these attributes are scored on a scale of 1 to 10. 1 is the worst possible score for that attribute. 10 is the best possible score. So I begin with my most important. Now, and if you notice in that specific example, I have set the threshold at 2.5. So if ever I reach a cumulative differentiation of 2.5, stop and choose that alternative. So let's do it. Let's go iteratively through the whole thing. And again, it's going to be a lot easier for you to follow if you actually look at the curves that I have, the screenshots that I've set up, that I've given you. Okay. So we're going to start with alternative dimension 1. Alternative A scores a 4. Alternative B scores an 8. So the difference between 8 and 4 is 4. And you multiply, right? This is called a weighted additive heuristic. So what I'm doing is 8 minus 4 is 4, and then I multiply that by the importance weight of that attribute. So 8 minus 4 is 4, times 0.3 is 1.2, meaning that after sampling the first piece of information on both alternative A and B, B is 1.2 ahead. So if you see on the curve, the first arrow goes down towards B at 1.2. Can I get a thumbs up from somebody that you know what the hell I'm talking about? Because I can't see your faces, so I don't know if people are following. Give me a thumbs up. Give me a quick thumbs up. Somebody, before I go on. Where's the thumbs up? Come on, guys. Anybody? I guess there's a delay between when I say, okay, Zagros gave me a thumbs up. It looks like, okay, we're doing well. Okay, we got another thumbs up. We got a whole bunch of thumbs up. Okay, we're going well. Okay, so now look, after one piece of information, alternative B is ahead by 1.2. But why don't I stop and choose B? Because I've decided, I as a decision maker, that for me to stop, I need to reach 2.5. Which is not a set rule, right? You may be a more anal decision maker. You just need to be more convinced before you make a choice. So you may set those thresholds, those stopping thresholds at 3.5, which basically means that on average, you're going to have to sample more information before you make a choice than I would. So that actually also captures personality differences across decision makers. You can't imagine how powerful this model is, okay? So, after one piece of information, A is ahead at 1.2. Is 1.2 greater than 2.5, which is my stopping threshold? No. That means I have to continue sampling more information. So now I get to the second piece of information, my second most important, which is D2. Now, alternative A scores a 9. It does very well on this. Alternative B does very poorly. It scores a 1. So 9 minus 1 is 8. 8 times 0.25 is 2. So meaning on that piece of attribute information, A is ahead by 2. But remember, B was ahead by 1.2. So 1.2 in one direction plus 2 in the other direction. So the net differentiation after two pieces of information have been sampled is that now A is ahead at 0.8. You get it? So after one piece, B was ahead by 1.2. After two pieces, the cumulative differentiation is that now A is ahead at 0.8. So after two pieces of information, A is ahead, but it hasn't hit the stopping threshold of 2.5. It's only ahead by 0.8, which tells my brain this is not enough of a differentiation between Mazda and Toyota for me to stop and choose. So I'm going to go on. Now I get to the third piece of information. 8 minus, which the third piece is D3, which is, as you could see, it has a weight of 0.2. 8 minus 3 is 5. 5 times 0.2 is 1 in favor of A. Now A was already ahead at 0.8, plus you add another 1. After three pieces of information, A is ahead at 1.8. So now A is starting to really differentiate itself. But while it's getting close to the stopping threshold of 2.5, it's not there yet. Therefore, my brain is saying, I'm not ready yet to stop. I need more differentiation before I choose between Clinton and Trump, between car A and car B, between this university and that university. So now I'm going to go on to the fourth piece of information, my fourth most important. It has a weight of 0.15. 10 minus 5 ahead of for A. A is 10, B is 5, so that's a difference of 5. 5 times 0.15, which is the weight for that attribute, is 0.75. Remember, A was already ahead at 1.5. Now it's ahead by another 0.75. So 1.8 plus 0.75, now it's at 2.25. So if you see the curve, it has hit and crossed the 2.5 curve that I had set. Meaning, after four pieces of information, I can now stop and choose alternative A. That's what we mean by a stopping sequential model. Now notice that this particular problem, it went up to D10, right? If you look at the bottom of that figure, there's a big line after D4, meaning I can stop. I've reached enough differentiation that I don't need to look at any more information. It only took me 4 pieces of information in order to choose car A or woman A or candidate A and so on. So that's what we mean by it's a sequential model. I sequentially keep acquiring information, and then I ask, have I reached my stopping threshold? If yes, I stop and choose the one that hit the threshold. If no, I acquire more information. Now, this model had already been proposed by German psychologists. And so I came along in my doctoral dissertation, and now you go to the next slide. This is the one where I write discrimination framework, Saad 1994. Saad 1994 is referencing my doctoral dissertation 30 years ago in 1994, right? So in my doctoral dissertation, I said, yes, this model is very nice. This iterative sequential model is very nice. But now notice, if you see, I argued that the thresholds should be concave. In other words, they should not be horizontal lines, as the German psychologists had proposed. Because if the threshold is horizontal, this means that throughout the entire decision process, you're never going to relax your threshold. You're always going to expect the same level of differentiation, whether you're on the first acquired attribute or the 87th acquired attribute. And that simply didn't ring true to me because, and as you hear, if you just read with me the reasons, so there are 2 reasons that can explain the concavity of the thresholds. At some point in the decision, the cost of acquiring additional information might become prohibitively high, hence the threshold is relaxed. It needs to be a concave threshold. Secondly, even if I had all of the patience and cognitive computational power in the world, if the 2 alternatives are poorly differentiated, like let's take the specific example of Mazda and Toyota. Well, they're both Japanese cars. Well, they're both roughly in the same luxury category. Well, they're both roughly of equal engineering quality, same price, and so on. So the tracking curve that I put up earlier is always going to be very close to the x-axis. It's never going to reach that desired threshold that I am hoping to reach in order to make a decision. Excuse me. So unless I'm able to relax my threshold in the concave manner that I've shown you, then I could potentially never reach a decision because I will never be able to sufficiently differentiate between the 2 alternatives in order to reach that horizontal threshold. So I ran a sequence of very elaborate experimental psychological studies. Experimental means you're running an experiment in a lab. So I actually had people come where they did decisions on a computer. It's called a process tracing algorithm that actually kept track of every single behavior that they made, which attribute they looked at next, how long, until when, what was their cumulative discrimination. And so then I can basically track your curve, and then I could use some mathematical modeling to be able to predict or to fit whether the stopping thresholds of each decision maker was in line with a horizontal model or a concave model. And exactly what I found in my doctoral dissertation, so that's the first big finding, is that I discovered that stopping thresholds in a sequential model are not horizontal, but they are concave, precisely because people are adaptive creatures, right? And so you could already see this evolutionary idea, right? Human beings are not these non-malleable with zero behavioral plasticity. In light of incoming information, I have to be able to adjust my behavior. And one of the ways that I adjust my behavior in the context of this model is I relax my threshold so that it becomes a concave threshold. Okay, so that's one. So that has a lot of, as I said, it's completely, it's cognitive psychology. It's if you like, it's literally neuropsychology in that you are tracking every iterative behavior, cognitive element of the decision process. And then, of course, it's got, some advanced mathematics because I'm trying to fit these functional forms to determine whether it's a concave curve or it's a horizontal curve. A second thing that I discovered in my doctoral dissertation, I'm just giving you the big lines. Of course, the entire dissertation goes through incredible tons of details and so on. The second big finding from my doctoral dissertation is I discovered another stopping heuristic, which I called the core attributes heuristic. What does that mean? So the core attributes heuristic, as you might imagine from the name of the heuristic, basically works as follows. It doesn't really at first concern itself with the stopping thresholds. It basically says, look, I don't care if there are 25 attributes that define a car. There are 5 core attributes that I care about. I'm going to sample those 5. Whichever car is ahead on those 5s, I stop and I choose it. And so it's a form of stopping threshold, but that's guided by a core set of attributes that are uniquely important to me. But what I also discovered is that when people apply the core attributes heuristic, they are mindful of the unfolding discrimination across the two alternatives. So let's say my core attribute set was made up of 5 attributes, but after 3 attributes, alternative A is so ahead that there's no way that it could ever reverse the decision. So then I would stop early, meaning I would stop earlier than the 5 core that I was hoping to reach. Because after 3, the cumulative differentiation is so much ahead for alternative A. And then at times I would stop late, meaning that once I reached my 5 core attributes, the discrimination between the two alternatives was so low, meaning the two alternatives were not sufficiently differentiated, that I thought, well, I better go on and sample beyond my core attributes set. So to summarize so far, and then I'll do one more main finding, and that would be it. I can't. It's so. One of the reasons why I wanted to do this XSpace is because, I mean, what is a doctoral dissertation defense? You get up in front of, well, it's a public defense. Of course, your committee's there, your doctoral committee, your doctoral supervisor, and the other committee members. It's a very austere moment. It's the highest level that you can reach in academia, obviously, the PhD. And you're presenting your work. Now, in who could have known that 30 years later, I will be sitting in front of a phone, speaking in front of, I don't know how many people are here, probably hundreds of people, maybe thousands, who knows. And then I'm giving the summary of exactly those findings. And by the way, I don't have any notes or anything in front of me. I'm just going off my head. And it was literally 30 years ago. And I mean, not even in a science fiction movie could I have imagined that I'm sitting doing an XSpaces with, all these people about my doctoral dissertation 30 years later. Okay, so far we've said that, okay, number one, okay, there's this stopping threshold called the criterion dependent choice model, but it assumes that your stopping thresholds are horizontal. I came along and said, no, it can't be horizontal thresholds. There needs to be adaptive behavior. There needs to be behavioral plasticity. So therefore, I'm going to hypothesize that the stopping thresholds are concave, and then I do a bunch of elaborate psychological experiments, and then I demonstrate that yes, indeed, those thresholds are concave. I also identify a new heuristic called the core attributes heuristic, which itself can be malleable. I could stop early in the core set, or I could stop late in the core set, depending on how much achieved differentiation I've achieved so far across the alternatives. And now, if you go to the last screenshot that I shared with you, I then said, okay, well, what happens to these thresholds, these concave thresholds, if I compare a decision maker's behavior under no time pressure versus under time pressure. You follow? So if you go back to the previous figure, you have the concave thresholds, and now look at the next one. You see there are two possible ways by which a decision maker can adapt his or her behavior in light of time pressure constraints. Now, before I get into the specifics, the cognitive psychological specifics, if I told you in words, what is it that you do? Well, if you're under time pressure, you have less time to make a decision. If you have less time to make a decision, how is it that you could adjust your behavior? Well, you could make a decision more quickly because you're under time pressure. How would you do that? Well, you would relax the threshold, the stopping threshold, or you could also accelerate the speed of your processing. So if you look, so there is one curve that's the no time pressure curve. Then there are two possible curves. There's one that looks, if you notice, I wrote, there's an arrow to a curve where I wrote maintaining the same rate of decay, but starting at a lower point on the y-axis. So I can just shift the curves down, maintaining the same rate of decay. What am I effectively saying? At any point in the process, I now simply need to reach a lower threshold before I stop and commit to a choice, which is exactly what I would do in a under time pressure. I need to make a decision more quickly. The other possible adaptive mechanism when I'm facing time pressure is the other curve that you see. I could start at the same point in the concave curve, but then the concave curve can decay more quickly. Okay? Both of these I found evidence for. Okay? So in other words, so just to summarize in case some of you are utterly confused, basically what I'm arguing is that when you're facing time pressure, you're obviously going to make a decision in ways that recognizes the fact that you're under time pressure. Within the context of the sequential stopping threshold model, how would you go about instantiating that realization? Well, you would alter, either you would shift in a parallel manner the entire curve down, the concave curve, or you would make the curve, the decay of the curve, be more staunch. It'd be a faster decay. Okay, and again, using mathematical modeling, I had the subjects, the participants, go through these tasks under time pressure and under no time pressure, and then I could fit the mathematical curves to be able to know which of these strategies they were using, and I found evidence for the strategies that I showed here. So, to summarize everything, the key problem in the doctoral dissertation was, when is it that people have acquired enough information to stop acquiring additional information and commit to a choice? So as you can see, this is why when people say, oh, but you know, how is that related to marketing? Well, I mean, it isn't. That's why, you know, I'm not a marketing guy, right? I mean, I happen to be housed in a marketing department because I end up studying things that are related to consumer behavior, economic decision making, and therefore, and plus, frankly, business school professors are on the top of the glitz and glory. And so, but the model, that's why I was so interested in studying it. It's a model that is applicable to any decision, not just consumer choice, right? It's any decision. And so later in my career, I ended up applying this model. So I married my doctoral dissertation with evolutionary psychology and evolutionary consumer psychology, which is the field that I founded, because I specifically applied this threshold model to mate choice. Specifically, I looked at the sex differences in where men and women set those stopping thresholds when they're choosing between mates. And again, what do you think from an evolutionary psychological perspective you might predict? is that women are going to set the thresholds higher than men. Why? Because when it comes specifically to mate choice, there's a much greater cost for women to make the wrong choice. They're not choosing between lawnmowers. They're not choosing between, uh, iPhones. When it comes to mate choice, parental investment theory tells us the sex that is the one most that has to offer the greater minimal obligatory parental investment is the one that has to be more sexually choosy. And therefore, we know that that's women. Therefore, I took that principle from evolutionary biology and I applied it to my sequential choice model, specifically in the context of mate choice. Yeah, that's right. That's why I'm Gad Saad. You got that, kids? That's why I am the Godfather. So basically, what I then did for the rest of my career is I kept marrying my work in psychology of decision making, my work in behavioral decision making, coupled with my interests and expertise in evolutionary psychology. So all the morons, there's all kinds of morons that write to me and say, "Oh, you're a marketing guy." I mean, not that, by the way, there's anything wrong. I mean, marketing is life, and life is marketing. Everything is marketing. So I don't need to justify that. But I'm only marketing in the sense that there are wonderful and exciting opportunities to study human nature within our consumatory instinct, right? Because short of breathing, right? That's why in my 2011 book, The Consuming Instinct, I say, I consume, therefore I am, right? Short of breathing, the thing that you do most is consume. I mean, you're consuming the current knowledge in this XSpaces session. We're a consumatory animal. We consume relationships, we consume friendships, we consume books, we consume marriages, we consume religion. So everything is consumatory. And so what I very early decided that I wanted to do was to be an applied behavioral scientist, an applied psychologist, in my case, marrying psychology of decision making, consumer psychology, and evolutionary psychology. And so this gives you a window into how it all started in my doctoral dissertation. And by the way, recently, just 2 months ago in April, I returned to Cornell to give two lectures, invited lectures, one on my 2020 book, The Parasitic Mind, and one on, regrettably, it's a topic that I wish I didn't have to talk about, on the global Jew hatred. And I'm sitting there looking in the audience, and who's sitting in the audience? My doctoral supervisor, Professor Jay Russo, who, by the way, has been inducted into I can't remember what it's called, the Society for the National of Scientists, like a big thing as a very well-known cognitive and mathematical psychologist. And so here I am at the time, it was in April, so nearly 30 years after I was up as a 29-year-old presenting my doctoral dissertation, which I just now had the pleasure of presenting it to you guys. And he was in the audience listening to me. And then I look and I see Professor Thomas Gilovich, who was a professor of mine also in psychology. He was the professor for a doctoral course in judgment and decision making. He's the guy, by the way, who pioneered the empirical study of psychology of regret, something that I cover in my happiness book, which I highly recommend. Please go out and buy it. It's done well, but not nearly as well as The Parasitic Mind. Somehow it got lost in the shuffle. My publisher was bought out last year by another publisher, so they were in complete chaos. And so I'm quite dismayed that it didn't get the attention that it should have, and that it's such a positive book. It's such a fun, optimistic book. It takes my personal trajectory of happiness, backed up by ancient wisdoms from the ancient Greeks and so on, backed up by contemporary, the latest science in psychology and happiness studies and neuroscience and positive psychology, and it puts it all together to give you hopefully some very actionable prescriptions of how to live the best life that you can. And so in one of the concluding chapter of the book, I talk about living a life that hopefully allows you to minimize future regret. And Thomas Gilovich is a professor who studied the difference between regrets due to action versus regrets due to inaction, right? And it turns out that over the long run, of course, most people, their most looming regrets are those of regrets due to inaction, right? I wish I had become the artist that I had always wanted to be. I always loved art, but I was, pressured into becoming a pediatrician because, my dad and his mom were pediatricians, and therefore it was expected of me. But now I wake up at 55 and I realize I hate my life. I hate medicine. I always wanted to be an artist, and I wanted to be immersed in the arts. And so many people have these types of regrets. And so I'm only mentioning this because, here I am 30 years later, and now all of my professors who are still around are there listening to me. And, in many cases, I'm, at this point, I don't want to say I outrank them. I don't want to talk like that about my professors. They'll always be my professors. But it's so reward, and even you could see it in their face. You could see that in the face of my doctoral supervisor. He's sitting there, and I'm sure, thinking, hey, I did well with this kid. He's turned out all right. So there's something really beautiful and magical. I mean, there is a reason why being a professor is, historically been, the most noble of professions. And of course, believe me, I'm the one who has been very hard on academia, because unfortunately academia has uh, not lived up to its the privilege that is given to academics in training your children and mine to how to think. And this is why I wrote The Parasitic Mind. This is why I've been railing against some of the stuff that's been going on in universities for, I just entered, by the way, my 31st year as a professor. I can't believe it. I straight out of my PhD, I got my first professorship. And uh, so it's both now my 30th anniversary of defending my doctoral dissertation, and then it's also, I've just finished my 30th year as a professor and about to start my 31st year. There's nothing more beautiful than academia, truly, uh, as long as you are a committed purveyor and pursuer of the truth. That's what makes it noble. That's what makes it enriching. That's what makes it soul enriching and mind enriching. Once that becomes parasitized by activism, by ideology, once you are no longer a dogged, unbiased pursuer of the truth, then you're a charlatan, you're a scammer, you're an activist, you're a politician, but you're certainly not an academic. And too many academics have lost sight of what it is to be an academic, to have the privilege of being someone who has to not only create new knowledge that future academics will read, but to train your children to become, hopefully, the great citizens that they will become. And so I take that responsibility very seriously. And this is why I decided to sort of talk about the trajectory of my 30 years, and then I'll wrap it up and thank you. Uh, I've lived my career in a way where I wanted to have as big an impact as possible in as many ways as possible. Now, I never set out. I never set out to say, hey, I really want to become a famous guy and so on. I just pursued my passion, the what I perceive to be the truth. I live a very authentic life, and in doing so, I've been fortunate enough to publish many scientific papers that were cited a lot. I've been able to write many books that have been bestsellers. Been able to build a platform that, I mean, I could have never imagined. I mean, 30 years ago, could I have imagined that I could walk down on any street and people are going to come up to you as if you're the Beatles. I never thought that would be possible. I never sought it out. It's beautiful. It's nice. It's beautiful, the love that you receive. Of course, it does come with some negatives. It comes with the negatives of people who don't like you, who send you death threats, who want to kill you, who want to do all sorts of bad things. For example, I don't know how I'm going to go back to university in September. I truly don't. I've been on sabbatical leave since October 7th. My university's gone completely insane. Being the high profile person that I am, being Jewish, being someone who shares his opinions without any filtering, uh, it's a problem. And so, but one of the reasons why I still stand and fight is because those shouldn't be problems that exist in a enlightened society. We're not in the dark ages. We're not living supposedly in an authoritarian reality. Professors should be able to speak their minds. If you think that my ideas are bad, defeat them with better ideas. But that's what made the West great. Excellence, commitment to the scientific method, meritocracy, individual dignity. All of the things that you thought you would take for granted are no longer for granted. As a matter of fact, they're controversial. As a matter of fact, they make you the pariah at my university. So imagine that I live in a reality where I have incredible accolades and love from around the world in ways that no very, very few professors in history would have ever imagined being able to have. And yet within my own university, I'm a cancer. There's the GAD-SAD problem. Well, what's the problem? I do scientific work that's, high quality. I publish in top journals. I'm cited a lot. I write books that are translated in 22, 23 languages. The parasitic mind is probably short of anything that maybe Jordan might have written, but he's no longer a professor. There's probably no other professor that's written books that have sold as much by a Canadian author than me, and yet you wouldn't know that I exist at Concordia. Well, that's a shame. That shouldn't be the case. Not because I need the approval of my employer, but because that demonstrates that we have a problem in academia, where up is down, left is right, male is female, freedom of speech is Nazism, biology is Nazism, and so on. And so the quicker we're able to eradicate these things, the quicker I can return to publishing scientific papers and not have to worry about appearing in front of the Canadian Senate to tell the Canadian senators, oh no, there really is evidence as such a thing as male and female in a sexually reproducing species made up of two phenotypes called male and female. That shouldn't require any testimony from an evolutionary behavioral scientist in 2017, right? So that's why uh, developing a mind vaccine, as I did in the parasitic mind, is so important, because there is nothing more beautiful than the scientific method. It allows us to do things that 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago would have seen science fiction. As per me talking now to hundreds of people on a Friday night before Shabbat, which I could have never imagined, none of us could have imagined that could ever happen. If you had seen it on a Star Trek episode, you'd say, oh, that can never happen. Well, it did happen, and many more things can happen, and they could only happen when we stay true to the freeing abilities of the scientific method. All right, guys, so listen, let me make a couple of requests to you before you head off. If you appreciate all this, I don't have to do this, right? I don't have to spend 50 minutes on a Friday night on the day of that anniversary doing this, but I'm excited to share this knowledge with people. So I do it out of pure purity. But it would be nice if people reciprocate. You could reciprocate in many ways. If you've not subscribed to my YouTube channel, my podcast, you can go and do that right away. That costs you nothing. Zero. Nothing. Nothing. Zero. You could do that. That helps because it increases my voice. You can go and subscribe to my exclusive content on X. That's for $6 a month. Well, imagine if I could get thousands of people to subscribe. Suddenly I could become a professor of the people. I just set up lectures the way that I'm doing now, and I don't have to worry about going to campus because someone is going to spit on me or attack me. I would have enough financial freedom to decide that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to be a professor to 10,000 people. So you can go and subscribe to my exclusive content. Do it. It doesn't cost much. It costs you as much as a latte per month. And I think you get a lot more in return than what you're paying to me. You can go and order copies of my books right now, right? Nothing in life should be parasitic, right? So I give you something, you give something in return, okay? So if there is any of these many ways that you think you can contribute, please do so. Let's fight for a return and defense of reason, of logic, of science, I'm about to head off to eat a massive, gargantuan Argentinian steak, which for those of you who live in Montreal, you should check out this place called Tango Imports. It's in the South Shore. He brings in uh, beef, vacuum packed beef straight from Argentina. So that's unbelievable. It completely tastes different. Not even for that. It's not even more expensive than what you would buy at the supermarket. So it's unbelievable. So we're gonna go do that. Tomorrow we're going to celebrate belatedly Father's Day, which happened last weekend. But my daughter at the time was studying, was very stressed about an exam she had early this week. So we took a rain check, which we're going to do that. And we're also going to celebrate the 30th anniversary of my PhD. So I hope that you've got some loved ones that you could spend some good moments with. Thank you so much for taking the time. I know you could have been many, many places. The fact that you chose to be with me is an honor and a privilege. Have a great weekend. Keep fighting the good fight, and I'll talk to you soon. Take care, everybody. Cheers.